Good afternoon. Today I'm going to be reviewing the Depancel Allure. This watch is available from depancel.com for €595. Depancel are a well-established microbrand. They were founded in 2018 in France. So firstly, let's look at the box that the watch comes in, and then I'll talk you through the specifications of the piece. So the watch comes in a watch roll which is housed inside this outer cardboard box. So one removes the lid to the outer cardboard box, which is a snug fit to the base. And in the base we have a cutout, and that houses the watch roll. So I'll take it out and show it to you. Watch roll is made from vinyl or PU leather. Very aesthetically pleasing black grain finish to it. It's matte finished. We have the Depancel emblem and Depancel logo. And I like the contrast of the orange trim and the contrasting interior, which is orange, as you can see. The interior is fully upholstered to a good standard with contrasting orange velour fabric, flawless stitching around the perimeter. And the watch sits on a padded pillow cushion, and either side, on the left and the right hand flanks, we have two stainless steel poppers, and they snap together with the body of the watch roll with nice positive clicks. So, very good presentation, good quality, well executed watch roll. And I think Depancel deserve credit here because we're looking at a mid-tier piece. Mid-tier is €500 to €5,000. This is an example to other mid-tier microbrands of how to get presentation correct. For example, they could have taken the less expensive default option of just using a plastic or cardboard watch box, but this vinyl or PU leather watch roll is good quality and I like it. In the base we have a cardboard cutout, as you can see. Good attention to detail because we have two orange ribbons which you can pull on. So easy to get good purchase, and you can withdraw the base then. Now in the base we have two compartments, and as you can see the right hand compartment houses the items which I'll show you. So the watch comes with this owner's instruction manual, and this is also the warranty card. Clear, concise diagrams. The instructions are in English and also bilingual. They're translated into French, and they detail the operation of the movement used, which is the Seiko Caliber VK63 Mecha Quartz. This also details the terms and conditions of the 5-year international warranty, and there's also a QR code you can scan inside, and this gives you instructions on how to set the watch. And we also have on the front page the guarantee certificate. Now I'm pleased to report that this piece is covered by a 5-year international warranty, which is excellent. Often mid-tier microbrands between €500 and €5,000 only cover their watches with a 12-month or 2-year international warranty. 5-year warranties are the industry standard for high-tier pieces at $10,000 plus price point. For example, Rolex offer a 5-year international warranty, which is to be expected. But we're not looking at a €10,000 plus price point high-tier piece here. This is mid-tier at €595. To see a microbrand in France offering a 5-year warranty is excellent, and they deserve full credit for that. And lastly, one also gets 2 spare links for the integrated bracelet, which is good. The bracelet can be sized, so you can request when you order the piece from depancel.com, you can give them your specific wrist size and they will make the bracelet to your size. They will size the bracelet from 6 inches up to 9 inches, and they also include an additional 2 integrated links if you want to adjust the bracelet length yourself. So it's good that they offer sizing, but also good that they offer an additional 2 links. So, with regards to the specifications of the piece, we have a 36mm case diameter, we have a lug-to-lug measurement of 42.7mm, a thickness of 11.1mm, and the integrated lug width internally is 16mm. The integrated bracelet is wider, it's flared, it's 20mm at the lugs, tapering to 18mm at the 2-button push butterfly clasp. So, to clarify, the internal lug width is 16mm. But however, the bracelet is wider, it's 20 to 18. 2-button push butterfly clasp has 2 buttons on the flanks which are mirror polished and recessed, so they are correctly proportioned. However, there's a negative. The butterfly clasp is sterile and unsigned, and this is a disappointment. One could be magnanimous about a sterile butterfly clasp without any logo or emblem engraved if this were a low tier piece. And to clarify, low tier is €0 to €500 price point, but however, one cannot be magnanimous with a mid-tier microbrand in France having a sterile clasp. I would like to see the butterfly clasp engraved either with the Depancel emblem or alternatively Depancel logo, because that would further enhance the piece and give it a more high quality feel. It is a production cost cutting measure in order to maximise profit margin per piece, and I think it's a production cost cutting measure too far to have a sterile butterfly clasp at this price point. We have a flat sapphire crystal with blue tinted AR coating on the underside, and the blue tinted anti-reflective coating does an outstanding job of reducing the glare and the highly reflective nature of the silver mirror polished baton handset and the silver mirror polished applied indices. I like the contrasting orange second hand. Visually, this piece does look and give the aesthetic of a 1970s tonneau cased chronograph, and that clearly is the inspiration for Depancel pieces. They are inspired by the 1970s. This really does look like a vintage 1970s piece. So the contrasting orange second hand was a feature of 1970s pieces such as chronographs, and I really like it. It contrasts very well with the matte black dial, but also adds interest to it. I like the yellow and orange accents on the tachymeter and the subdials. It adds interest to it and again gives it a vintage aesthetic. Quality of the printing to the tachymeter is excellent. The white, yellow and Arabic numerals are high definition and crisp. The font isn't too thick and blurry. Quality of the printing to the subdials at 9, 6 and 3 is also sharp and high definition. The font is clearly legible. I like the contrasting orange subdial second hand on the 9 o'clock subdial, and the white hands also contrast well on the 6 and 3 o'clock subdials respectively. Good attention to detail because there are silver mirror polish rings around the 9 and 3 o'clock subdials. That also adds interest. So tachymeter is clearly legible. The chapter ring around the circumference of the dial for the 60-minute ticks for the seconds is also clearly legible, and the handset is correctly proportioned. Nice attention to detail because the hour and minute baton hands have orange portions or orange stripes, and that complements the contrasting orange chronograph hand, which is tapered. Also, I like the contrast of the white Lume on the baton hands, which is C3 Superlume Nova. There's a perfect colour tone match between the white Superlume Nova on the applied indices and also the baton hands. They don't look more cream or white on the dial or hands. They are the same white tone in daylight. So dial is clearly legible. I like the symmetry of the subdials, and it's very aesthetically pleasing. Nice symmetrical dial layouts with the absence of a date complication at the 4 o'clock position. Now subjectively one can be critical because this is powered by the Seiko Caliber VK63 Mecha Quartz, which is a date complication Mecha Quartz, and the date wheel is still present beneath the dial, and therefore we do have a phantom date setting position. Some collectors would argue that subjectively this should have a date window at 4 o'clock. It does have a date complication, so why not use it? But I think that would spoil the symmetry of the dial, and I like the symmetry of the 9, 6 and 3 subdials with the absence of a date complication at 4. But again, this is subjective. Some collectors prefer a chronograph with a date, some collectors prefer it without. So tonneau case is solid 316L grade stainless steel, longitudinal brush satin finishing to the top of the tonneau case, angular lugs to the integrated lugs, also longitudinally brush satin finished, and that complements the longitudinal brush satin finishing to the flanks. Nice large mirror polished bevels which run the full length of the tonneau case, and the large mirror polished bevels mark the transition between the top of the tonneau case and the flanks. I like the quality of the mirror polishing. It complements the mirror polishing to the domed solid 316L grade stainless steel bezel. They've made the correct decision by using a flat sapphire crystal rather than a box top hat crystal or double dome sapphire crystal, because the benefit of the flat sapphire crystal is this piece is very thin and low profile. It is only 11.1, so therefore they've maximised the benefit of using the Seiko Caliber VK63 Mecha Quartz, which is a thin caliber, because unlike many mechanical chronograph pieces which are automatic or mechanical manual wind chronographs, they are generally 30mm plus with 50 meters of water resistance because they are thicker, but this is very low profile. 11.1 is very thin, so flat sapphire crystal is correct choice. And I like the bevel on the edge of it which catches the light. It projects above the top of the mirror polished bezel, which has a nice domed profile. So quality of the finishing to the head of the piece is excellent. Nice fine grained satin finish to the tops of the tonneau case, the angular integrated lugs and also the flanks. On the left hand flank we have this plaque which is applied with 2 flat head screws. Mirror polished plaque is engraved with high definition engraving with the serial number of the piece, and this does add interest to the piece. The plaque isn't too bulky or large, so it doesn't extend beyond the left hand flank too much. It doesn't stick out too proud from the left hand flank, but it is aesthetically pleasing and it does give the piece a high end feel. Quality of the mirror polishing to the plaque is very good. It's recessed into the left hand flank and it's done to a very good standard. No sharp edge to the undercuts to the flank, which is good because there's a large mirror polished bevel which runs the full length of the undercut to the tonneau case. Just bear with me, I'll get the camera to focus on it. And you can see the large mirror polished bevel machined into the underside of the flanks. This deletes the sharp edge. This is good because visually it reduces the proportion of the flank. It doesn't look like a block or a thick slab of 316L grade stainless steel, despite using a tonneau case, which is vintage style. Tonneau cases were popular in the 1960s and 1970s. They were used for dive pieces and also chronographs, and the tonneau case shape with the integrated angular lugs does give it a 1970s aesthetic. But I like that large mirror polish bevel on the undercuts to the flanks because that does delete the sharp edge, and therefore there's no sharp edge scratching the wrist. This feels comfortable. It enhances the comfort level and feel good factor. So let's test the chronograph complication and the push-pull crown. Hexagon profile to the crown. Now the crown is a push-pull crown versus a screw-down crown. One could be critical of this. This piece only has 50 metres, which is acceptable for a chronograph piece. We're not looking at a dive piece, therefore it doesn't need 100 or 200. However, with a mid-tier piece at €595, 100 metres is now the expected industry standard for a chronograph, even if it has pushers without screw-down collars, as per the Daytona. And really, I would like to see a screw-down crown at this price point versus a push-pull crown. The push-pull crown is acceptable, but if they're going to use standard pushers with a push-pull crown, I think the minimum should be 100 metres. That is now the industry standard. 50 really is a disappointing production cost cutting measure because of course 50 metres of hermetic seal on the pushers and 50 metres of hermetic seal on the push-pull crown, it reduces production costs per piece and therefore maximises profit margin per piece. When you increase the water resistance of pushers and also a screw down crown or push-pull crown to 100 or 200 metres, of course you increase production costs and therefore reduce profit margin per piece. So that's why they've chosen 50. Subjectively, one could say that 50 does have a benefit of a thinner case back than 100 or 200, and therefore they've been able to slim this piece down to only 11.1. Also, because it's only 50 metres, it does have a thinner sapphire crystal. With 100 and 200 metres respectively, one needs a thicker sapphire crystal. It needs to be 1.5 millimetres versus 1 millimetre, for example. So there are pros and cons of this only being 50 metres. The thin case back and thin sapphire crystal are the positives. The negatives are 100 metres is lacking. We only have 50. But let's test the execution. Top pusher has a nice positive click, and that's a characteristic I really like about the Seiko Caliber VK63 Mecha Quartz. Nice, crisp, heavy spring-loaded action. Nice loud audible click. Feels good, sounds good. I really like the proportions of the tapered orange contrasting second hand because, as I've detailed, orange chronograph hands were popular in the 1960s and 1970s, and they contrast very well, but they also give the piece a vintage aesthetic, and I really like it. It makes a refreshing change from using a silver mirror polished chronograph hand, and I like the proportions of the taper on it. It does really look like a 1970s piece as a result. Pushing the top pusher stops the chronograph again, nice crisp click to it. Pressing the lower pusher resets it, and it resets bang on 60 on the tachymeter scale, bang on the 12 o'clock index, and bang on 60 on the chapter ring. So I'm going to test it 3 out of 3 times because, as you'll know from my previous reviews, with a chronograph, I always like to test it 3 out of 3 times. And what I'm looking for, what I'm actually testing, is the alignment of the chronograph hand resetting. Does it reset bang on 12? Does it reset bang on 60 on the tachymeter scale? Because sometimes with VK63 powered pieces and also VK64 powered pieces, the chronograph hand has slight misalignments. It will align slightly to the left or the right of the 60 mark on the tachymeter. But by testing it 3 out of 3 times, it confirms it. It proves beyond doubt that it has correct alignment. So one more time, the alignment is correct. I'm going to test it a third and final time. Nice crisp action to the reset, bang on the 60. This is perfect. Now this is the benefit of Depancel being based in France. To clarify, this watch is not made in China. Depancel assemble their watches in France. The quality control takes place in France. Now of course that does increase production costs per piece and therefore diminishes profit margin per piece, but I like to see a watch that is assembled in France versus assembled in China because it means that there is higher quality control level. And you can see the benefits. This chronograph hand resets 3 out of 3 times, bang on the centre, bang on 60 on the tachymeter. This is the benefit of this piece being assembled in France versus assembled in China, and the quality control taking place in France. It has a higher quality control level as a result. Hexagon crown, and has a groove which is machined into it and an anodized orange ring. So nice attention to detail. The hexagonal 6 flats are mirror polished to a flawless standard. Sorry, they're brushed satin finished actually on the flats. The groove is well machined, no sharp edges or burrs to it, and the anodised ring is also done very well. So nice attention to detail, and the orange anodised ring complements the orange accents on the subdials, tachymeter and contrasting chronograph hand. So the cap to it is brushed satin finished, and we have the Depancel emblem engraved with high definition engraving. So very nicely finished, correctly proportioned. It's large enough to be grippy and tactile. You can get good purchase with your index finger and thumb, but it's not too large. So when you flex the wrist, the hexagonal crown doesn't dig into the back of the wrist. That's the point. It doesn't project too far from the right hand flank of the tonneau case. So correct proportions, grippy and tactile. Now, the negative of this being VK63 Mecha Quartz powered is, as I've detailed, it does have a date complication, but they haven't utilised it. Now, the negative is it does have a phantom date setting position. Pulling it out to the first click position, when you rotate the hexagonal crown, you can feel the date wheel clicking over with a quick set complication. So the date wheel is still present beneath the dial. They haven't deleted it, and this does have the phantom date setting position. So it does have 2 clicks on the crown versus 1. That's something to be mindful of if you dislike phantom date setting positions. Putting it out to the second click position hacks the movement. And if you look at the 6 o'clock subdial, you can see the second hand has now stopped dead. I'll just move the hand out of the way, you'll see it better. So the subdial at 6 is for the seconds, and you can see the white contrasting subdial hand has now stopped dead. Therefore, it's possible to set the time precisely to the second with a caliber VK63. We're now in the time setting position. Light resistance to it because it has 0 joules, no friction whatsoever. Feels smooth, doesn't feel rough or gritty, doesn't feel stiff. Very light resistance to it, both clockwise and anti-clockwise. So it feels smooth to set the time. I like the proportions of the baton hands, and I like the orange stripes on the baton hour and minute hand. They add interest. They also contrast well with the black dial, but they also complement the orange accent of the chronograph tapered hand. So it feels good to set the time. Minimal backplay in it. When you rotate the hexagon crown, there's an almost immediate response to the baton minute hand. Pushing it back in, it's got a nice positive click, and that reinstates the 50 metres of hermetic seal and also restarts the movement. You can see the subdial second hand on the 6 o'clock subdial begins to tick around the subdial once again. So feels good to set the time. Hacking works well. The negative is the phantom date setting position, but that's just the way it is with a VK63. One has to be mindful of that. So let's look at the bracelet in detail. Integrated bracelet. So to remind you, the internal lug width of the integrated end links are 16. 16 is really undersized. I prefer had they used 18 or 20. Now the reason why I say that is if you want to exchange this integrated bracelet for a strap, for example a leather or rubber strap or NATO strap, this does limit your options because needless to say a 16mm strap is not going to be wide enough for this 36mm tonneau case. 18 would be the sweet spot. 20 would look slightly too wide and it would delete too much of the meat internally from the tonneau case. I think 18 would have been correct. An 18mm leather strap or alternatively a rubber strap on a tonneau case like this would look very aesthetically pleasing. Problem with 16 is it does limit your strap options because the industry standard sizes for straps are now 18, 20 and 22 respectively. 16 is rather undersized, and it's a shame they didn't use 18 because the problem is if you want to exchange the integrated bracelet, you're not going to have many options for a 16 strap unless you use a flared strap which is wider, and that doesn't look aesthetically pleasing. 18 would have given more options, but there we are. The bracelet tapers, so although it's 16 internally, the lug width is 16, the actual flared taper of the integrated bracelet is wider. It's 20 down to 18. Now, again, I think they've missed an opportunity because I often refer to this in my previous use, the 20 to 16 perfection personified taper. There are 2 industry standards for good reason, 22 to 18 and 20 to 16, which I always call the perfection personified taper because on a 36, 37, 38 and 39mm head of the piece, a 20 to 16 taper cannot be beaten. It is the ultimate. It's aesthetically pleasing but also aggressively tapers, so therefore it deletes a lot of the meat from the bracelet, therefore perfectly balances the head of the piece. So, for example, regardless of whether you have a bead of rice bracelet, oyster style, jubilee style bracelet, or in this case, integrated bracelet, the 20 to 16 gives visually an aesthetically pleasing look, but also correctly balances the bracelet for a small head of the piece like this, a 36 tonneau case. 20 to 18 is more straight and parallel. The taper isn't as aggressive. Now, it is okay. Visually, it does look aesthetically pleasing. Again, this is subjective. Some collectors like a straight bracelet. They like it to look parallel, for example 20 to 20 or 18 to 18. This one does have a slight taper, it's not aggressive, it's 20 to 18. I think 20 to 16 with a more aggressive taper would have looked better, but this really is subjective. It comes down to what kind of taper you like. Do you like straight bracelets? Do you like tapered bracelets? But let's check the execution. So, integrated end links. Now, the negative is the integrated end links do not articulate much. There's not much flex, as you can see. And this applies to the entire bracelet. So to show you, you can see it doesn't articulate as much as a Jubilee style or Oyster style or even a flat link style bracelet or a beads of rice bracelet. It really doesn't flex. Now if I press it in with my thumb and index finger, that's the maximum amount. You can see it doesn't flex very much. And if I curve it to its absolute maximum, I'm pressing with my two thumbs now, either end, that's the maximum curvature. Now, on a positive note, the curvature is okay for a smaller 6 to 7 inch wrist. The curvature is also okay for a larger 7 to 8 inch plus wrist. That's not a problem. But it doesn't articulate as much. It doesn't flex as much up and down as a Jubilee style or Oyster style bracelet. That's something to note. On a positive note, it feels nice and tight. It doesn't rattle. Now, it does use push pins as a production cost cutting measure rather than screw pins. Subjectively, one can be critical of this because we're not looking at a low tier piece which is made in China and below €500. Low tier is 0 to 500. This is €595, so we are well within the mid tier, 500 to 5,000. At this price point, 595, one expects to see 1.2 or 1.6mm screw pins, which are the industry standard at this price point. Push pins, which are split pins versus pin and collars, are a clear production cost cutting measure, and I would argue a production cost cutting measure too far. 1.2mm screw pins would benefit this bracelet. It would give it a higher end feel. Now, on a positive note, it doesn't rattle. It's not sloppy, so that's good. But one could say the negative is it doesn't flex or doesn't articulate as much as a flat link bracelet or alternatively Jubilee style or Oyster style. But in terms of finishing, it is stellar. Brushed satin finishing has a nice fine grained finish, so beautiful luster to the integrated bracelet links. No sharp edge to the top edge or the low edge of the flanks, so it doesn't feel sharp, doesn't scratch the wrist, that's the benefit. And it does look very well finished. Brushed satin finishing to the flanks is done to a flawless standard and it matches the brushed satin finishing to the top side and the underside. Let's check the other side for continuity. Again, the articulated links do not articulate very much. So, for example, one doesn't get the benefit of female pivoted end links because the end link in the integrated bracelet cannot pivot beneath the tips of the tonneau case. But, however, tolerances are good. Doesn't have excess longitudinal, lateral, side-to-side or up and down play. I'll check the other side for play. Again, doesn't have excess longitudinal, lateral, up and down, side-to-side play. So, interference friction fit of the spring bar going through the end links is good. But the negative is we don't have much articulation. But it does feel nice and tight. That's the benefit. It's not sloppy, doesn't have any sharp edges, doesn't pull arm hairs. It is very comfortable. Now, as I've detailed, I'd like to see an update or a V2 version. This butterfly clasp needs to be engraved with a Depancel emblem or alternatively Depancel text logo. Sterile butterfly clasps are not acceptable at €595. This is disappointing, but there we are. Opens freely. So, 2 button push butterfly clasp, 2 heavily sprung loaded triggers, they feel reliable and robust, that's good. Flawless mirror polishing to the top side, underside and flanks. No sharp edges to the top edge or the low edge of the flanks. The left hand inner corners have been deburred and chamfered well, the right hand inner corners have been deburred and chamfered well, so no sharp edges, no sharp corners. But there's a glaring embarrassing mistake. I often see this on mid-tier pieces. Stainless steel is engraved upside down. It's engraved with high definition engraving, but it needs to be inverted. It's the wrong way up. So, the reason why I say it's the wrong way up, and I always clarify this, because when I level criticism at a brand, I like to be fair rather than unfair. I like to be unbiased, and my reviews are credible. So, the majority of collectors wear the piece this way up, on the left wrist. And then when they take the piece off the wrist, they rotate it round like so. And this is the way the clasp faces up. This is the correct orientation. Press the 2 button push triggers with your index finger and thumb and it opens like so. So this is now the correct orientation for the majority of collectors that wear a piece on the left hand wrist. And you can see the orientation is now the correct way, but stainless steel is engraved upside down. It's inverted. And it's very simple for them to correct this. They simply engrave it the other way up. But this is a kind of fundamental that mid-tier brands need to get correct. Now, if this were a low-tier piece made in China from €0 to €500, one could be magnanimous about these kind of glaring, embarrassing mistakes. But with a mid-tier piece, which is assembled in France, with quality control in France, one cannot be magnanimous. This needs to be engraved the right way up. That's just the way it is. €595, stainless steel needs to be engraved the right way up. It's embarrassing. So, they need to correct that. Let's check the hinge pins. Left hand hinge pin articulates freely, doesn't feel stiff or kink. Minimal play, that's good. Left hand inner hinge pin articulates freely, doesn't feel stiff or kink, doesn't have excess play, that's good. Right hand inner hinge pin articulates freely, doesn't feel stiff or kink, doesn't have excess play. Right hand outer hinge pin articulates freely, doesn't feel stiff or kink, doesn't have excess play, feels nice and tight. Pleasant surprise. So, mirror polishing is good. Execution of the 4 hinge pins, left hand outer, left hand inner, right hand outer. All 4 hinge pins are friction interference fits. Snap shut with a nice positive click. It's not handed, you can close the left or the right portions. It doesn't overlap. Opens freely. Works good, feels good, looks good. They just need to engrave it with Depancel or the emblem to bring it up to a higher level, €595 mid-tier level, and they also simply need to invert the engraving because that's embarrassing, upside down stainless steel. But there we are. Let's look at the case back in detail. So, solid 316L grade stainless steel case back engraved with the Depancel shield, and you see that Depancel shield with the 3 stars. It is aesthetically pleasing. They could engrave that quite easily on the butterfly clasp links, or alternatively simply engrave Depancel, but this is what I like to see. I like to see an emblem or engraving on the 3 places, the crown, the case back and also the clasp. So, flat case back, concentric CNC lathe tool machine to the centre, mirror polish circumference, and it is screwed down with 4 stainless steel screws, which are flat head screws. What I like about it is, it's very flat. This is not a deep bubble back case back one sees on automatics. This is a very flat case back. So they have fully utilised the benefit of this being powered by the Seiko VK63 Mecha Quartz, which is very low profile. It's a thinner calibre than a mechanical manual wind movement or alternatively an automatic chronograph calibre. This is nice and flat. So you can see the benefit. The centre section is perfectly flat. So this means the piece is only 11.1. Now the negative is it only provides an effective hermetic seal to 50 metres, and you can see why, because it's thin, but also we have 4 flat head screws. This is not a screw down case back, it's screwed down. So we have the case back screwed down to the tonneau case with 4 flat head screws versus being a circular case back which is screwed down. So I prefer a screw down case back with 100 or 200 metres of hermetic seal, but one has to be realistic. This is a 50 metre water resistant chronograph. It is acceptable. We're not looking at a dive piece. The engraving around the circumference is high definition and crisp. It details the specification and reference number of the piece, and I like the engraving of the Depancel shield. It adds interest to the centre section versus making it sterile. And it doesn't feel sharp or rough, which is good, because often high definition engraving, which is deep like this shield, it feels sharp, and that diminishes the comfort level and the feel-good factor, but this one feels nice and smooth, so they've deburred it very well. Concentric CNC lathe tool machining refracts the light, so that looks very good, and the mirror polishing is excellent. So it is a very well finished, screwed down stainless steel case back. Solid end links for the integrated bracelet are a tight fit to the undersides of the tonneau case. The undersides of the tonneau case is concentric CNC lathe tool machined, and what I like about it, as I've detailed, is the large mirror polished bevels which are machined into the undercuts to the flanks, because the benefit of the bevels, that large mirror polished bevel on the left and the right hand flanks of the tonneau case, they delete the sharp edge. Comfort level and feel good factor are maximised as a result. So I'll give you a wrist shots and you can see how it fits on my 8-inch wrist. Now, as I've detailed, Depancel offer different size bracelets. So when you purchase the piece, when you order it, you can specify your wrist size in centimetres. And you can specify, for example, if you have a 6, 7, 8 or even a 9-inch wrist size, they will make the bracelet to your correct wrist size, and they also include 2 integrated links. However, there is a negative to this butterfly clasp on the bracelet, and I'll apply this, or I'll level this criticism at all butterfly clasp, not just Depancel. There are no half links in the integrated bracelet. We only have full links throughout. Now, what they need to do with this is add a half link on the 6 o'clock side and a half link on the 12 o'clock side. The reason is because Sometimes adding or subtracting one full integrated link from a bracelet like this with a butterfly clasp doesn't give the desired fit. The bracelet will either feel slightly too tight or slightly too loose. And what one needs to get the perfect fit is a half link. And the other benefit is, for example, if you need to remove one link from the bracelet, you can remove a half link on the 6 side, half link on the 12 o'clock side. The reason why that's beneficial is you can keep the 2 button push triggers or buttons to the butterfly bang on the centre of the wrist. Otherwise it will be offset slightly to the 6 or slightly to the 12 o'clock side. The clasp will never sit centrally. I like clasp to be bang on the centre, not too far to the left, not too far to the right on wrist. And by having a half link either side, you can get the perfect fit, but you can also keep the clasp centralised. So they could update this. I'd like to see a V2 clasp with Depancel engraved to sign it, and also a half link on the 6 and a half link on the 12 side. Because the problem with butterfly clasp, and it is always the problem, I'm not just levelling this criticism at Depancel, it's all butterfly clasp, there is no ratcheting mechanism. We don't have micro adjustment, and the problem is you cannot get on the fly adjustment with a butterfly clasp. You can't adjust this. For example, in warmer weather or when you are active and the wrist swells up, the bracelet becomes tighter and therefore you don't have any on the fly adjustment. We don't have a glide lock style mechanism or ratcheting mechanism with spring loaded trigger. This is the problem with butterfly clasp. You have to size the bracelet correctly, and I often refer to this. The correct sizing method for sizing any bracelet, regardless of whether it's an oyster style, jubilee style, beads of rice style, or flat link bracelet. You have to be able to slide an index finger beneath bracelets and clasps at all times. The reason why this is the correct sizing method is this allows for wrist expansion in warmer weather or when one is active. So if the wrist swells up, you have that one index finger of expansion, and this means the bracelet is always the correct size. It's never too tight, even when the wrist swells up. But nonetheless, half link either side would be beneficial, and of course sign it to make it more aesthetically pleasing. Now I haven't sized this bracelet, and I'm pleased to report it actually fits my 8-inch wrist perfectly. You can see I can easily slide an index finger beneath it, which is the correct size. So aesthetically, the luster looks fantastic. Nice fine-grained satin finishing to the top side, underside and flanks. And I love the luster of it. The integrated links catch the light beautifully. So it's a very good looking bracelet. It does look aesthetically pleasing. It does give the aesthetic of a 1970s piece, and clearly this is inspired by 1970s tonneau case chronographs. So beautiful. They've done a very good job of the profiling of the integrated links. The end link in the integrated bracelet integrates very well with the flat profile to the angular lugs on the tonneau case, and by having this angular bevel machined into the tonneau case, it deletes some of the meat but also makes the bracelet integrate smoothly, so it looks good. But we do have a slight gap beneath the tips of the tonneau case and also beneath the bracelet because it doesn't articulate as well as female Pouzzelin links. They could machine more meat from the internals and that would allow it to pivot more. That could be refined with the V2 version, but it's surprisingly low profile. One thing I like about this piece above all else is it's not a thick tonneau case. It doesn't sit on top of the wrist like a thick slab of 316L grade stainless steel. This is not 12 or 13 millimeters. We're only looking at 11.1. So needless to say, with the flat sapphire crystal and the flat case back, at 11.1, this is easily going to slip underneath the shirt cuff. You'll know from my previous reviews, 13 and below is the sweet spot for a piece to easily slip underneath the shirt cuff if you wear business shirts. So it's 11.1, it's well below the 13. Taper isn't as much as I'd like. It doesn't have the perfection personified 20 to 16 taper, which would look more aesthetically pleasing, but 20 to 18 is acceptable. And I like the proportions of the 36mm tonneau case. Although it is 36 diameter, due to the tonneau case shape, it actually wears more like a 38. And it does have enough wrist presence. It's surprising because even on my large 8-inch wrist, you can see the 36 diameter at its widest point of the tonneau case. Visually, it does look more like a 38. It does wear with more wrist presence than one would expect. I like the fact it's very thin and low profile. We don't have tall, thick slab sides to it, and it does look very aesthetically pleasing. They've definitely made the correct choice by using a flat sapphire crystal versus a box top hat crystal to give it a vintage aesthetic, or a double dome sapphire crystal, because that would have added 2mm of thickness. And this is the benefit of a flat sapphire crystal. It is only 11.1. The other thing I really like about this piece is the lack of heft. It's only 134 grams with all the links. Now bear in mind, this does have a long bracelet. It fits my 8-inch wrist correctly. If you have a 6 to 7 inch wrist, you're going to be removing 6 links. Even if you have a 7 to 8 inch wrist, you're going to be removing 4 links from the integrated bracelet. But nonetheless, with all the links at 8 inches size, you can see this is only 134. I would expect this to be circa 150 grams with this tonneau case and these solid integrated bracelets, but it's pleasantly surprising, the lack of heft. It does feel like a very comfortable piece. No sharp edges to the integrated bracelet, so it doesn't feel sharp, doesn't scratch the wrist when it moves up and down, doesn't pull arm hairs, which is good. And also, it flows nicely. Although it's a stiff integrated bracelet, it doesn't articulate or flex as much as an Oyster style or Jubilee style bracelet. It actually curves very nicely, so the curvature is good. And the curvature will fit regardless of whether you have a 6 to 7 or a 7 to 8 inch wrist. The bracelet does flex nicely. I like it. It's not a sloppy bracelet, it feels nice and tight. Beautiful luster to it. I like the way it catches the light. Nice profiling to the integrated links. And it works very well. AR coating works well. Contrast of the orange stripes on the hour and minute hand are clearly legible. And I like the contrast of the orange tapered chronograph hand. Looks good, feels good. Really does give the essence of a 1970s tonneau case chronograph. It's got that vintage look, but modern day specifications, sapphire crystal. So, good looking piece, comfortable to wear. Feel good factor is good, comfort level is good. And I like the look of it. I think it's a great looking piece from every angle. And although it's a 36, it actually wears more like a 38. It looks good and feels good, doesn't have too much heft. Right, so let's do a Lume test and we'll see how the Lume performs when it's charged up to the absolute maximum. Now, Depancel do not specify which superluminova they're using, but it looks like green C3. So I'm going to say it's green C3 superluminova. So as always, I'm going to use my 100 UV LED torch to charge it up to the absolute peak. Right, so that's now fully charged, and as you can see, it is okay. I'm not going to say it's disappointing, but I think there's room for improvement because we're clearly not looking at 5 to 6 layers because the camera is immediately struggling to autofocus, and this tells me the exciter lacks potency. And when I say the exciter lacks potency, I'm referring to the brightness because in C3 and BGW9 respectively, they have very potent exciters. That makes the Lume glow very white, very bright. That improves the longevity of the glow. And the potency of the exciter really depends on the number of layers. For example, if you have 5 to 6 layers, that's the industry standard, that is the maximum optimum potency of the exciter. And what you can see here is, I think we're looking at 2 to 3 layers or a maximum of 3 to 4. On a positive note, there's a good colour tone match in daylight. They look white, both on the applied indices and also the baton handset. They don't look more cream or white, but in the dark, there's also a good colour tone match. They both look green. Problem is not enough layers. Now, one has to appreciate we're not looking at a dive piece. The indices which are applied are not as deep as dive watch indices. The baton hands are slender, therefore they don't allow for a large area or large plot as per Mercedes hands or alternatively snowflake hands used on a dive piece. But nonetheless, this is not good enough. Now, if this were a low-tier piece made in China, between €0 and €500, one can be magnanimous about this kind of production cost-cutting measure in order to maximise profit margin per piece. But this kind of lack of potency to the exciter, 2 to 3 or 3 to 4 layers, it's not acceptable for an assembled in France piece in the mid-tier at $595. Depancel really need to improve this. It needs to be 5 to 6 on the dial, 5 to 6 on the hands. Because as you can see, this is not looking like 5 to 6. The colour tone match is good. The green tone is the same on the dial and hands, but you can see because of the lack of potency, the camera is struggling to autofocus on it. And when you have 5 to 6, the camera can autofocus on it because the potency of the exciter is bright enough. But you can see the problem there. It immediately fades, and exponentially with time it fades very quickly. And that really tells me it's 2 to 3 or 3 to 4 maximum. We're not looking at 5 to 6. I do appreciate this is a chronograph piece. It's not a dive piece, but nonetheless, 5 to 6 is mandatory at this price point. €595. This does not say to me assembled in France. This does not say to me €595 of quality. What this says to me is €0 to €500 low tier performance. So it's okay, but I think there's room for improvement. And of course, one has to accept the absence of the indices at 9 and 6 and 3 due to the subdials. That's just the way it is. But you can see the problem. Just doesn't have the potency of 5 to 6. This is 2 to 3 or 3 to 4 maximum. So room for improvement required. Right, so let's discuss the movement use because it's one of my favourite aspects of the piece. You'll all be familiar with the Seiko VK63 Mecha Quartz. It's a reliable, well-proven Mecha Quartz movement which has been in service since 2015. So at this stage in 2025, its reliability has been proven beyond question. Made in Japan, quality control, build quality, materials and finishing are excellent. It has 0 joules. And it has hacking, which is useful. Now, the negative is it has a quick set date complication, and in this case, it hasn't been utilised. We don't have a date complication or a date window at 4 o'clock. Subjectively, one could be critical, as I've detailed. Some collectors would say this has a VK63, has a date, why not use it? I like the symmetry and the clarity of the dial without the date complication, but some collectors would argue they prefer a date on a chronograph. It comes down to your personal preference. The negative of the VK63 having a date complication is, as I've detailed, we have a phantom date setting position on the crown. There are 2 clicks. You can feel the date complication clicking over. So there are 2 clicks, and it's a shame that they didn't use the date complication because we have the phantom date setting position. Might as well use it. Stated accuracy is plus or minus 20 seconds per month. So just think about that for a moment. That's not plus or minus 20 seconds per day or per week. Plus or minus 20 seconds per month is incredible accuracy, better than plus or minus 1 second per day. 3-year battery life. Now, I want to clarify something. The 3-year battery life is based upon you using the caliber VK63 Mecha Quartz with a chronograph complication running for 60 minutes per day. So you can wear this piece every day for 3 years before needing to change the battery, but that is based upon you using the chronograph for 60 minutes per day. In reality, you're not going to be using the chronograph complication for anything like 60 minutes every day. So therefore, this 3-year battery life is the stated battery life. That's the minimum. In reality, it's nothing unusual for a VK63 battery to last 4, 5 or even 6 years. If you don't use the chronograph complication for 60 minutes per day, you can extend the battery life from 3 years to 4 to 5 to even 6. So potentially you could purchase this piece and wear it every day for 5 to 6 years before needing to change the battery. That's the benefit. Very long battery life. And even if you use the chronograph for 60 minutes per day, it will still last 3 years. So long battery life is a benefit. Accuracy is the other benefit, plus or minus 20 per month. Not per day, per week, per month. Incredibly accurate. No negatives to it whatsoever. I like the reliability and I like that it's been in service since 2015. It is the correct choice at this price point. So last I'll summarise the piece. What do I think of it overall? Well, when I'm considering reviewing a watch on my channel, the watch should meet 2 criteria. It should be both excellent quality and excellent value at the respective price point. So mid-tier piece, to remind you, mid-tier is 500 to 5,000 euro. This is 595, so we're well within the mid-tier. I'm going to declare it good quality, but I'm going to declare the value as poor. The reason why I say the value is poor and not good or excellent is because this does need some refinements. The Superlume Nova is disappointing. It's not 5 to 6 layers, and at €595, 5 to 6 layers of C3 is mandatory. One cannot be magnanimous about it. If this were a low tier piece between 0 and 500, one could be magnanimous, but at 595 we are well within the mid tier. Mandatory 6 layers. So Depancel need to improve that. The other production cost cutting measure, which is a step too far, is the sterile butterfly clasp. It needs to have the emblem, alternatively Depancel logo, engraved. Again, one could be magnanimous between 0 to 500 in the low tier, but we're looking at 595. It's mandatory to have a signed clasp, regardless of whether it's a butterfly clasp, deployant clasp, or alternatively micro adjustment clasp. It needs to be signed with an emblem or signed with a logo, one of the two. And this is disappointing. It's clearly a production cost cutting measure in order to maximise profit margin per piece. Now, I have to appreciate, or I have to remind you, that this piece is not made in China. Depancel watches are assembled in France. The quality control also takes place in France. Now that does increase production costs per piece. And of course, the benefit is of this being assembled in France and the quality control taking place in France is of course it's higher level than being made in China and having lower quality control levels. So one has to factor that into the retail price, 595, because it's more expensive to assemble watches in France than it is in China. And of course, microbrands like Depancel, although they have been in production since 2018, the foundation, their profit margin per piece is lower than Chinese-made watches because they're making smaller batches. So, for example, to clarify, if this watch were made in China, it would be part of a 1,000 piece batch. And when you have large batch production of 1,000 plus pieces, that reduces the production cost per piece, and therefore that maximizes profit margin per piece. Micro brands make smaller batches, for example, between 100 and 500 pieces. So if Depancel make 500 of these pieces, their production cost per piece is much higher than if it were made in China with lower production costs as part of a larger batch. Their profit margin is lower, so therefore they need to increase the retail price in order to cover the higher production costs. That's just the way it is. But even if I factor in all those factors, I have to say that this is good quality, but I can't say it's excellent quality because it needs better quality Super Lume Nova and it needs to have a signed clasp. The value, I would say, is poor because this does face some stiff competition from other micro brands in the mid-tier. And at $595, that is the sweet spot for micro brands. And using the VK63 is acceptable, but if you're going to do that, you need to have 5 to 6 layers of C3, Super Lume Nova, and you definitely need to have a signed clasp in order to make it competitive. That would upgrade this to good quality and good value, or excellent quality and excellent value. I'd like to see a V2 version of this. Now, above all else, I'll remind you, this is the one embarrassing glaring error, and I often see this with micro brands, and it's surprising because stainless steel, just bear with me, I'll get the camera to focus on it. Stainless steel is engraved upside down, and we're not looking at a low-tier Chinese-made piece. This is assembled in France with French quality control. One would expect a quality controller in France to pick this up and say, stainless steel is upside down, we need to invert it. But they've let this go into production and pass quality control with it upside down. So these are the kind of refinements I look for with a mid-tier piece, regardless of where it's made. So I'd like to see a V2 version of this with 6 layers of C3, a signed clasp, and invert the stainless steel engraving to correct the errors. Then I would upgrade it to good quality and good value. But as it stands, it's good quality and poor value. So I hope you've enjoyed my review of the Depancel Allure. Please feel free to post your own comments below the video. Thank you for watching.